Today on Beyond 6 Seconds.
We enjoy moving the mountain, right? It might be harder and take longer to help a pharmaceutical or a large nonprofit or federal agency to develop a very innovative approach. But at the end of the day, if we're able to do that, it can affect positively the lives of hundreds of millions of people.
Welcome to Beyond 6 Seconds, the podcast that goes beyond the 6-second first impression to share the extraordinary stories and achievements of everyday people. I'm your host, Carolyn Keel. My guest on today's podcast is Sara Holoubek. Sara is the CEO and founder of Luminary Labs, a consultancy that develops strategies and innovation systems to help Fortune 500, government, and nonprofit organizations thrive in the face of change. She is also an active early-stage investor. Sara is particularly passionate about the thorny problems that matter, such as stemming chronic disease, closing the skills gap, rethinking the future of work, and using data to make smart cities safer. She's been recognized by LinkedIn as a 2017 top voice in technology, by Mashable as a female founder to watch, by Smart CEO magazine as a 2017 New York Brava Award winner, and by PepsiCo Win for her contributions to women in technology. Sara, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you for having me, Carolyn.
Today, we're going to talk about something called open innovation, which Luminary Labs does a lot of work in. Could you tell us a little bit about what is open innovation and how is it different from the innovation that most businesses practice?
So the University of California's Henry Chesbrough is really considered an authority and one of the individuals who coined the term open innovation. And he describes it as a paradigm that assumes that firms can and should use external ideas as well as internal ideas and internal and external paths to market as the firms look to advance their technology. So in layman's speak, it means that rather than seeking solutions from within your organization's four walls or even within a known solver or partner base, we should use open innovation to identify solutions from external sources, from even the fringes of an ecosystem, which is often where the most novel concepts reside. In practice, open innovation can include things like prize competitions or open innovation challenges, hackathons, codeathons or data jams, crowdsourcing, open data initiatives or open research initiatives, or even co-creation or participatory design.
Oh, very interesting. So what inspired you to create an open innovation platform at Luminary Labs?
Well, our open innovation practice was born out of a real client's business strategy problem. We had just completed a service strategy project. So this was for a company, pharmaceutical, that was looking to identify partners, potential startups, early teams that might have ideas on how to help people living with diabetes live happy, successful, healthy lives. And so the pharmaceutical was an expert at making drugs. They were looking for people who were experts in data, technology, apps, hardware, et cetera. And we had completed this service strategy exercise where we identified, 4 early pilot partners. And at one point, the client said, how can we look at 100 ideas? And so I was at South by Southwest scouting companies that they could partner with. And I met a government official, somebody who worked for Health and Human Services, who said, I have an idea for you. Why don't you run an open innovation competition? And this was sort of a novel new idea. This individual was one of the early members of the open data initiatives within government. And he suggested that we encourage participants to use their open data sets at healthdata.gov. So I came back to New York and I said to the client, I said, okay, here's an idea. Let's run an open innovation competition. Now, this is a pharmaceutical and they are not, especially at that time, they were not that accustomed to opening up. But within 3 months, we were live with what was really a groundbreaking challenge for the pharmaceutical industry. And it was designed to accomplish this particular challenge of closing the gap between concept and viability. So we designed it in sort of our way of doing it, not the sort of traditional path for a challenge at the time, which was more like giving money for ideas. We really wanted to close that gap. And so we developed the challenge, which later led to more challenges and then later an entire practice. Since that time, in 2011, our practice has awarded over $5 million in cash prizes, as well as a few million in non-monetary awards to innovators who address really complex problems while stimulating a larger conversation with the public about these problems that matter.
Wow, that's awesome. How are the specific challenges identified and designed?
So we always say start with the real problem. Most of our clients come to us with what they think the problem is. It might be a subject area and an early idea of what they would like to do. But we spend a good part of the time, anywhere from 1 to 5 months, working with the client on what we would call problem statement decomposition.
Mm-hmm.
And the idea here is to really get to the root cause of the problem. So, somebody might come to us and say, we want to use novel technology to address chronic disease. And we say, well, what's the problem? Is there a problem with the technology? Is there a problem with the disease state? Right. And as you sort of peel the layers away, you will find that maybe it's something about there's too much friction in the process and we would like to reduce friction. Okay, well, that gets us a little closer to what we want to do. Mm-hmm. So the clients are coming to us because they have a real business problem. We are known for focusing on the thorny problems. Mm-hmm. So it is things like chronic disease, the detection of biothreats, or transferring skill sets for next generation jobs, things like that. And it's really our job to then narrow the problem statement, develop the call to action, and design the prize mechanism so that it is attractive to the solver base and is accomplishing the need of the client.
Very good. So do all of your ideas for the challenges come from your clients? Do you ever get them from other sources, or is it mainly your clients?
Well, one of the best things to do early on in challenge design is to meet with experts. Mm. Experts can include potential solvers. They can include subject matter experts. They can include end users of the solution that you're trying to develop. Mm-hmm. And we do all of this and more to inform the challenge design. Wow. Again, oftentimes our clients will come to us with an idea, but the initial idea and what is launched is usually quite different, right? Mm-hmm. Because we're peeling away those layers to get to the ground truth and the real problem that needs to be solved. Oftentimes, potential solvers or potential end users are very helpful in determining where the guideposts are. So we might be designing a challenge where the prize purse is a couple $100,000, and the solver base will say, I know a couple $100,000 sounds like a lot of money, but just so that if we were to develop this on our own, it would take us $4 million. Mm. So we have to, kind of figure out what are the other goods or services we can get that team or those teams in the challenge design that would compensate them so that they would have the incentive to enter. So there are many things that go into challenge design, right? It's the right call to action, that prompt, it is the criteria, the rules, terms, and conditions. Who's judging the challenge matters. The rubric for judging matters, the goods and services that are being offered, or the prize purse, right? So many of our participants will tell you that the learning opportunities often outweigh the cash, even when the cash is significant.
Oh, that's great. And what kind of individuals or organizations usually apply to complete these challenges?
Well, one of the great things about open innovation is that you are looking at the fringes of the ecosystem. And so we like to design a call to action that is clear to understand for the layperson. So you do not need to be an expert in whatever the subject is to enter. Mm-hmm. And that's how you get a wide variety of participants. In any given challenge, we might see a suite of finalists that includes a startup, maybe a team of academics, maybe it's a large company partnering with a small company or an individual, or sometimes, a team of people, and they're not even a company. And so it really does vary. And therefore, their strengths and their weaknesses vary, mm-hmm. which is why this idea of giving them more than just money is important. Mm-hmm. This idea of the virtual accelerator, closing the gaps for these different teams. Some teams might need more subject matter expertise. Some might need more guidance on the available data sets. Some might need design thinking and empathy for the end user.
Wow. So you're really bringing together a diverse set of people and organizations and teams of people and helping to guide them through a methodology to really look at the problem, consider the end user or the customer, and help them shape their ideas into something. That's really interesting.
Yeah, and that's really that idea of the virtual accelerator period. Yeah. So we tend to specialize in what we would call large-scale multi-stage challenges. Mm-hmm. And the way that works is that as opposed to a hackathon, which is more like a sprint that happens over a few days, mm-hmm. a multi-stage challenge unfolds over months or even a year or two. Throughout that period, the independent jury is narrowing the pool of participants. Mm-hmm. And so we might go from, let's just say there are 100 entries and it gets narrowed to 5 semifinalists. They go through a virtual accelerator. They present at a demo day. After that demo day, maybe 2 are selected and they get additional opportunities to pilot or test their solution. And from that, we have the jury select one winner. So the methodology that we developed includes this virtual accelerator component, which includes education, mentorship, exercises in empathy building, subject matter knowledge, rapid prototyping, business modeling. These are all the things that help a team close the gap between concept, like I have an idea, and making it real.
So how much time do you usually spend with the people or organizations competing in the challenges on going through the methodology? Because the virtual accelerator sounds like an amazing program, and that there's a lot of thought and effort that goes into diagnosing where people's strengths are and what needs to be done and looking at the ideas. So I'm just curious about what kind of time investment is there between Luminary Labs and the people who are applying for the challenge?
Yeah, it's significant. And so typically what we'll do is we'll design it to be a virtual accelerator. So you do not need to physically be someplace for, say 5 months, but within that, there might be an in-person boot camp. And what we like about this, and again, I mentioned earlier that we borrow the best practices of the accelerators and incubators without requiring you to physically move, right? So that's a barrier for many people. If you want to engage in open innovation and you really want anybody to be able to participate, if we say that you have to physically move someplace for 5 months, you're automatically cutting out a broad swath of potential participants, right? People who maybe they have families or other obligations so they can't move.
Right.
But people can go to a boot camp for a few days. So during the virtual accelerator, there will be a series of mentors who have office hours. Those mentors are chosen based on the particular gaps or areas where we feel the teams might benefit from learning a little bit more, running ideas past individuals. That could be anything from business modeling to data science to product development. It really just depends upon the challenge. And then during the in-person boot camp, this is a pretty intense, anywhere from 1 to 3 day program. And it typically will start off with a welcome and introduction. So we're creating this co-opetition element. 5 teams who are competitors now have to sit in a room together and share ideas, which is really beautiful because it pushes each other. And oftentimes we find that these teams later on become great friends and colleagues. We'll go to a conference and we'll see 2 teams that were competing walking around a conference together. After that, we go into, what is their first pitch? We go into some empathy exercises when possible, and this happens more often than not. We set up a mechanism where they can speak with end users. So that could be somebody living with a chronic disease, or that could be somebody who deals with biothreat systems on a daily basis, depending upon the challenge. There will be educational modules around the subject matter or around data sets or technologies. In the case of the Alexa Diabetes Challenge, which we ran last year on behalf of Merck, the boot camp was actually held at Amazon, right? So these teams were able to go to Amazon HQ and, get access to people and have that space and time to refine their solutions in a way that, really a startup would not be able to do on their own.
Sure. Yeah. And I can see how the methodology and the virtual accelerator in particular is just an incredible education and experience for the people going through it, even above and beyond just the prize money itself and the promise of the product. I could imagine using that education and bringing that forward with you through the rest of your career. So that's really great. What a great opportunity.
Well, here's the funny part is we recently surveyed all of the prize winners from 14 challenges we ran over the past 7 years. And we asked them what their primary motivation was for entering. And then we asked them after the challenge, what was the greatest benefit? And not everyone's in it for the money. However, a good number of the participants were motivated by the cash prize purse.
Sure.
And many of them would even say that they saw the virtual accelerator at onset as something that they had to do to get the money. But after the challenge, we found that nearly half of the team said that those learning opportunities were the most important part of participating in the challenge. And so I think it's a really great statement on, when you're working on a problem that matters, whether it's chronic disease or, the future of education, the closer you can get to real people, whether it's, somebody living with a chronic disease or a student or a teacher, the better your solution will be. And so the whole point of the virtual accelerator is to improve the product, and therefore we need to connect with real people. But more often than not, tech startups don't seem to like to connect with end users unless we create the mechanism where it makes it easy for them. So we're delighted to do that. And there's nothing more beautiful than seeing a team have an aha after they've spoken to a real person and figured out how their solution could be even better.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. Now, you've successfully innovated and done open innovation within regulated industries. You mentioned pharmaceuticals, and even with federal agencies, which are two things that most people probably wouldn't consider as the most innovative organizations in the space. But part of your success involves what you've called hug the lawyers as early as possible. And I'm interested to learn a little bit more about that. Can you tell us more about what that means and how that helps with innovation?
Absolutely. We often say that it's one thing to innovate for Nike, is another thing to innovate for the FDA, right? Right. And there's no real better place to play. They're just different types of organizations. And we enjoy moving the mountain, right? It might be harder and take longer to help a pharmaceutical or a large nonprofit or federal agency to develop a very innovative approach. But at the end of the day, if we're able to do that, it can affect positively the lives of hundreds of millions of people, right? And so maybe we're masochists, but that's what we love to do. And so one of the things that we found very early on working with pharmaceuticals, and we work a lot in the healthcare space, was if you are going to do something that is wildly innovative and deviates from the norm, you want to bring the lawyers in early. You want to develop a relationship where they can help you design the program so that it can get done and be sort of a co-creator, a partner. And the same can be said for communications. The worst thing you can do to a lawyer or communications team is just throw it over the fence and say, we're launching this next week.
Right.
So, we invite them to the kickoff and we take the time to explain open innovation, the mechanism. We take the time to provide previous examples. So is there precedent, for another organization that's done this? There almost always is, but it's a rather niche way of solving a problem. And so we can't expect every federal agency and every healthcare company to know what has been done and how it has been done. And over the years that we've learned how to design for what you can do, not for what you can't do. And so that's really our goal in hugging the lawyers, is understand that they have a very important job, which is mitigating risk. And it would be folly for us to pretend that, they weren't necessary. So oftentimes I encourage people who are considering a path in innovation or technology to spend time in large organizations and learning how to move the needle. What are the conditions for success? Right. Just because an organization is large and might have a lower risk tolerance doesn't mean that they can't innovate or improve the lives of people through innovation.
I think it's definitely something for people to keep in mind, particularly with large organizations that are trying to manage risk. I think people tend to think of those risk management roles as the people who say no, but I think a great way is to bring those different roles in early. And I would imagine that a lot of them are excited to be at the kickoffs and to be involved in the solutions.
Absolutely. There's one lawyer I'll never forget he was one of the first lawyers we worked with, and we decided to invite him to a demo day so that he could actually see what it felt like. And as you know, most demo days typically have drinks and cocktails. And he said, this is really quite nice. He kind of now I understand the vibe of what's happening. But, that's something you can do is if you take the lawyers, invite them to a similar event in the industry, expose them to what you're trying to do, demonstrate, the positive effect and outcome before you just throw it over the fence. It's much better to have a partner than it is to simply expect somebody to approve something without really understanding it.
Absolutely. So for all the different challenges that you run, how are the winners selected?
So we typically have an independent jury. There are two ways that the jury can be selected. It depends upon the client, and public and private clients have different requirements based on the law. So our private sector clients typically prefer that we identify the jury. We like to develop juries that have diversity in many senses of the word. We like to have people who will bring up points of view that might not typically be considered in a space. So I'll give you an example. During the Alexa Diabetes Challenge, voice-enabled technology is rather new for everyone, and especially for healthcare. And as with any artificial intelligence, we need to be aware of potential biases or accessibility concerns. And so we created a slot for one judge to be an expert in tech ethics. And so in addition to the people who are experts on voice-enabled technology and somebody who worked in a hospital and somebody who's a venture capitalist, right, the diversity of sort of opinions about technology, we included an ethicist who had experience working with other technologies and health technologies. And that was really important to that challenge, that we didn't have to do that, but we did that because we thought it would send a particularly strong signal to the developer community and to the larger industry that, if you're going to go forth and use artificial intelligence and voice-enabled technology in the healthcare system, you need to be thinking about unintended consequences. Mm-hmm. So that's how that would happen in the private sector. Sometimes the clients might suggest that it would be nice to have a particular archetype, but we're really responsible for that. They are independent. They are not compensated. We try to avoid conflict of interest and that kind of thing. In the public sector, sometimes we are selecting the jury. Sometimes for a very niche challenge, the client might send forth particular experts. So if we're doing something that in a particular area of science where multiple federal agencies are interested in that space, they might set forth, 9 individuals. But we are responsible for working with them to ensure that there is no conflict of interest. We have software to manage the judging process. And following the judging exercise, we will name the finalists, and then we repeat that process if there's, sort of a second tier, if there's a piloting phase and then a winner phase.
I see. Oh, wow. Going across all the different challenges that you've seen through your open innovation platform with Luminary Labs, are there any particular success stories that stand out that you'd like to share more about on the podcast today?
Sure. I think success can be measured in many ways. Every client has their own yardstick for what good looks like for them. Mm-hmm. Most of them are trying to stimulate a marketplace as well. So there's sort of the internal goal and then the larger, for the industry goal. And then, of course, for the participants, there's what does success look like? So mm-hmm. I would say the thing that makes me most proud is the sort of novelty and breadth of the challenges we've been running over the past few years. So like in the last year and a half, we ran the Alexa Diabetes Challenge, which is bringing together voice-enabled technology and chronic disease. We called upon AR and VR developers to develop solutions for students to transfer skill sets for these jobs of the future mm-hmm. for the U.S. Department of Education. And so like bringing together those two industries was also incredibly meaningful and what I would consider success if we think about the future of education. And last but not least, we ran a challenge, the Mood Challenge for Research Kit, which called upon researchers to develop research kit applications. So again, that's Apple's open source framework to understand mood and its social determinants. And so these are really novel approaches to solving a problem, bringing forth a relatively new technology and another sort of solver base and asking them to put these two things together for the common good, right? For society's good. So for me, that's success, is seeing open innovation being applied to the problems that matter. More specifically to the solver base, in our recent survey that I mentioned a little bit earlier, we found that 2/3 of the teams we surveyed had raised funds after the challenge. Oh. So in the form of grants, venture capital, seed investment, crowdfunding, prizes, in amounts anywhere from $5,000 to $25 million.
Wow.
But what's really interesting is that conservatively, we estimate that the prize recipients had gone on to cumulatively raise $100 million. Oh. So that we knew anecdotally, we would see that, this company had raised the money and that company won another prize and this one got a large grant, but to really quantify it and say, wow, over the past 7 or 8 years, we've given away $5 million on behalf of our clients. But then those teams go off and in turn have raised over $100 million. You can sort of see that there's like this exponential value of open innovation.
Wow, that's great.
Another proxy for success would be the filing of patents. So we saw 8 different teams filing at least one patent since participating in the challenge. We saw 5% of the teams we surveyed had sold their solutions after the challenge. So they had an exit. Ooh. Almost every participant continued to develop the solution either directly, but 20% folded it into another product or service, which suggests that open innovation is like both a short game and a long game. Mm-hmm. Another proxy would be, of the 25% of recipients that were not even a company when they entered the challenge, they were a team of individuals. We found that nearly half of those teams went on to form companies. Wow. So, we see these other sort of proxies for success. And while raising capital doesn't necessarily mean that one will be wildly successful, capital is important to develop the solution. So, we really enjoy hearing those stories and we're delighted to quantify that impact.
That's awesome. And it really highlights that open innovation is the start of the journey. It's not a contained event. It really yields a lot of benefits even after the challenge is over. And I think that the metrics that you're looking at really illustrate that.
Yes, absolutely.
Now, for the ideas that win or even compete in the Open Innovation Challenge that Luminary Labs sponsors, what advantages would you say that they would have versus ideas that are generated through other methods of innovation that businesses may use?
Well, the first part is that the cash has no dilution. It's not like taking an investment where somebody gets a piece of equity. So it's sort of quote unquote free cash. You have to participate in the challenge and meet the terms and conditions, but that's really great. So whether it's $100,000 or $600,000, that gives you runway. But even more important than the monetary prizes, I think, is that proximity and access to future partners, customers, or acquirers. So the sponsoring organization, and sometimes there are two, so like the Alexa Challenge being Merck and Amazon, gave proximity to a tech partner, but also proximity to a pharmaceutical. And so ultimately, these startups or these teams are going to be working with these companies in any number of ways. And so developing those relationships becomes a lot easier. They have a vested interest in seeing you do well. We've seen some of the teams go on and get investment from the venture fund of that sponsoring organization or become customers of. And last but not least, that competition element that I mentioned earlier really pushes the field to do better. And, when you're a startup and you're on your own, you know who your competition is. But when you have to be in a room with them and you're competing with them, it really raises the bar. And so I think that those are benefits that really any participant gets. That all being said, there's something about being time bound. So let's say that the submission form is open for 4 to 6 weeks, something like that is typical. We have heard from a number of participants that just being given the challenge of refining a submission in that period of time, it was a forcing function, that time-bound element that I have to get it in a particular day, force them to do something, right? To get something down on paper, really think it through. And then if you're a finalist or a semifinalist or, so on, the time-bound nature of the challenge, whether it's a few months or longer, you have to accomplish something. You either have to build the prototype or you have to get to user testing or whatever the challenge demands that you do within these time constraints. And they say like necessity is the mother of innovation, right? Like when you really need to do something, you figure out how to do it. Yeah. And so there's that element as well when it comes to prize competitions.
Yeah, absolutely. I can see how some people like to look at innovation and having like a blank sheet of paper to write on, but I think those constraints and restrictions really help with the creativity and the innovation process. Absolutely. This is all so incredibly interesting, and I thank you for telling me and my audience more about the concept of open innovation. How can people or organizations learn more about it, or if they want to get involved in open innovation with Luminary Labs, where can they find more information?
So the best way to hear about challenge launches or other programs that we're running in the innovation or open innovation space would be to sign up for the lab report. It's our weekly newsletter. So you can go to luminary-labs.com and sign up for the newsletter there. You can also follow us on Twitter at Luminary Labs. For practitioners of open innovation, so these are people who are responsible for producing challenges, hackathons, open data platforms on behalf of their companies or nonprofits or federal agencies. We're actually conducting an open innovation survey right now. And so if individuals are doing this and they're interested in participating, they can email editor@luminary-labs.com and get an invite to participate in that survey.
Awesome. And I'll put that contact information in the show notes of our podcast so people can view it there too.
Super. Thank you.
Wonderful. Well, thank you so much, Sara, for telling us more about open innovation. It's really exciting and just fascinating, the whole methodology that's been built around it. And so wonderful to see all of these new people and companies, some who have never worked together before, how they just go on to do wonderful things and really help use technology to improve and address all of those thorny problems in society. So thank you so much for talking with us on the podcast today.
Thank you for having me.
Thanks for listening to the Beyond 6 Seconds podcast. Please subscribe to the show in iTunes or your favorite podcast player so you won't miss any episodes. You can also find all the show notes and links we discussed in this episode at our website, www.beyond6seconds.com. Until next time.